And hey guys, tonight we are going to the most popular house in the village. We are stepping into the warm, sweet-smelling kitchen of the alewife. We are going to brew the drink that fueled the Middle Ages. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Now, imagine the smell of warm honey and grain, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The morning air outside is sharp and clean, the kind that makes your breath visible in small white clouds. But here, at the threshold of this kitchen, everything changes. You push open the heavy wooden door, and immediately a wall of warmth greets you. It's humid, almost tropical, and carries with it a sweetness that's difficult to place at first. Not fruit exactly, not flowers. Something deeper, more fundamental. Grain and sugar and fermentation, all tangled together in the steam that rises from the copper vessels and wooden tubs that dominate this space. This is the brewhouse, and though it's attached to a home, though there's a hearth for cooking and a table for eating, this room belongs first and foremost to the work of making ale. The ceiling beams are dark with decades of moisture and smoke. The stone floor is worn smooth in certain places, the paths most traveled, the spots where the alewife stands hour after hour, day after day, season after season, transforming water and grain into the drink that everyone needs, everyone wants, everyone expects. The contrast between outside and inside is striking. Out there, the world is waking slowly, reluctantly. The sun is just beginning to lighten the eastern sky, turning it from black to deep blue to a pale, hesitant gray. The village is quiet. A rooster crows somewhere in the distance. Smoke begins to rise from a few chimneys. But in here, the work has already begun. The fire under the copper has been burning for an hour, maybe more. The heat is building. The water is warming. And the air is thick with anticipation and steam. You can feel the moisture on your skin almost immediately. It settles on your face, your hands, the fabric of your clothing. Everything in this room is slightly damp, slightly warm, slightly alive with the process of transformation. The wood swells with it. The copper gleams with it. Even the air seems to hold weight, substance, presence. This is a working space, but there's a beauty to it. The copper vessels catch the firelight and throw it back in warm, amber tones. The wood, though worn, is polished smooth by constant use, by hands that have touched these surfaces thousands upon thousands of times. There's a rhythm to this place, a heartbeat, and once you step inside and close the door behind you, you become part of that rhythm. The world outside fades. Time slows. And all that matters is the work, the ancient work, the sacred work of turning the earth's gifts into something humans have treasured since the very beginning of civilization. The alewife is already here, of course. She's always here on brewing days. She moves through the space with the confidence of someone who knows every inch of it, who could navigate it blindfolded if necessary. Her sleeves are rolled up despite the early hour. Her hair is tied back under a cloth, and her hands, strong and capable, are already reaching for the tools she'll need, checking the fire, testing the temperature of the water with a practiced touch. This room is her domain. This work is her craft. And for the next several hours, you'll watch as she performs a kind of alchemy, a transformation that is both simple and miraculous, ancient and essential. The copper dominates the room, not just in size, though it is certainly large, but in presence. It sits over the fire like a throne, like the heart of the entire operation, which in many ways it is. This is where the water boils. This is where the liquid receives its heat, its energy, its readiness for the transformation to come. The vessel itself is beautiful. Copper, when it's well maintained, has a glow to it, a warmth that goes beyond mere reflection. This copper has been hammered and shaped by skilled hands, formed into a broad, rounded pot that can hold gallons upon gallons of liquid. The surface is smooth, polished by use and by care. The alewife keeps it clean, scrubbing it after each use with salt and vinegar, making sure no residue remains that might spoil the next batch. Right now, in the firelight, the copper seems almost alive. The flames dance beneath it, licking up the sides, and the metal catches that light and transforms it into something softer, something golden. You can see the faint marks where the hammer struck during its creation, tiny dimples and variations in the surface that give it character, that remind you this object was made by human hands, with human effort, with human skill. The rim of the copper is thick and rounded, designed to be gripped, to be leaned against, to withstand the constant interaction with paddles and ladles and hands. It's slightly darker there, oxidized perhaps, or simply stained by years of use. Below the rim, the copper curves outward and then down, creating a belly, a space where the liquid can move and circulate as it heats. And beneath it all, the fire. The alewife has built it carefully, using seasoned wood that burns hot and steady without too much smoke. She knows exactly how much fuel to use, how to bank it for a slow heat or feed it for a rapid boil. The flames are hungry but controlled, and the heat they produce rises straight up into the copper, into the water, beginning the process that will continue for hours. But the copper is not alone in this room. Scattered around it, arranged with the logic of long practice, are the wooden tons. These are large tubs, cooperage, made by the same craftsmen who make barrels and buckets and all the other essential containers of medieval life. They're constructed from oak, primarily, thick staves held together with iron hoops, sealed with a mixture of pitch and tradition. The wood of the tons has its own beauty, different from the copper, but no less compelling. It's darker, richer, with grain patterns that swirl and flow like rivers frozen in time. Oak is perfect for this work because it's strong, because it doesn't impart unwanted flavors, because it can withstand moisture without rotting, at least not for many, many years. When these tons are empty, you can see the precision of their construction. The staves fit together so tightly that water cannot pass between them. The bottom is a single piece, or several pieces joined so seamlessly you'd never know. The iron hoops are slightly rusty, oxidized by the constant exposure to moisture, but they're solid, doing their job, holding everything together against the outward pressure of the liquid they contain. But the tons are rarely empty for long. Right now, one of them already holds water from yesterday's preparation. The surface is calm, reflective, catching the firelight and the shadows of the ceiling beams. Another sits ready, waiting for the mash, for the moment when grain and hot water will meet and begin their conversation. The wood of the tons is wet. Not just damp, but genuinely wet, swollen with moisture, sealed by it. When you touch it, your fingers come away slightly damp. The surface is smooth in places, rough in others, depending on how the grain runs, how the wood has aged. There's a certain warmth to it, even though wood is not warm the way copper is warm. This is the warmth of life, of organic matter, of something that was once a living tree and still retains some memory of that existence. Between the copper and the tons, leaning against the wall, is the mash paddle. This tool deserves its own recognition, its own moment of appreciation, because it will do so much of the work to come. It's a simple object, really. A long wooden handle, perhaps 6 feet in length, attached to a broad, flat blade. But in that simplicity lies its perfection. The handle has been worn smooth by countless hands, countless hours of stirring. The wood is pale where it's been gripped most often, darkened by oils from skin, by sweat, by the inevitable transfer that happens when humans and objects work together over time. It's thick enough to grasp firmly, to brace against your body when the mash is heavy and resistant. The blade at the end is wider, flatter, perforated with holes that allow the liquid to pass through as you stir, reducing resistance while still moving the grain. The edges are rounded, not sharp, designed to scrape along the bottom and sides of the tun without damaging the wood. This paddle is not a weapon. It's not a tool of force. It's an instrument of gentleness, of circulation, of ensuring that every grain meets the hot water, that every kernel releases its treasure. When you lift the paddle, you can feel its weight. Solid oak, most likely, dense and heavy. But it's balanced, designed to be used for long periods without excessive fatigue. The alewife knows exactly how to hold it, where to place her hands, how to use her body weight rather than her arm's strength to move the mash. The textures in this room tell a story. The smooth, gleaming copper speaks of heat and metal and precision. The rough, damp wood of the tons speaks of containment and patience and organic process. And the polished, worn surface of the paddle speaks of labor, of repetition, of the human element that brings all these materials together into something greater than themselves. Everything is ready. The copper gleams, the tons wait, the paddle rests. And now the work begins in earnest with the simplest and most essential ingredient of all. Outside, beyond the warm walls of the brewhouse, there's a well. It's not far, just across the yard, positioned carefully to serve the household's needs while remaining accessible even in deep winter. The well is old, its stones dark with moisture and moss, its wooden cover weathered but solid. The alewife steps out into that sharp morning air, and the temperature shift is immediate and bracing. The sweat on her skin from the heat of the fire suddenly feels cool, almost cold. She breathes deeply, filling her lungs with clean air before she returns to the steam and warmth inside. The well cover is heavy. It takes both hands to shift it, sliding it to one side with a scrape of wood against stone. And then the well itself is revealed, a dark circle descending into the earth, into the cold places where water gathers and waits. The rope is thick, rough against the palms, and the bucket at its end is wooden, small enough to handle but large enough to make the trips worthwhile. She lowers it slowly, hand over hand, letting the rope slide through her grip with practiced control. The bucket descends, turning slightly as it goes, and then there's the sound. The splash. Not loud, not dramatic, just a clean, clear sound of wood meeting water, of the bucket breaking through the surface and beginning to fill. She waits a moment, letting it sink, letting it take on weight. Then she begins to pull. Hand over hand, the reverse of the lowering, the rope sliding upward, the bucket rising from those cold depths. It's heavier now, much heavier, and she can feel the strain in her shoulders, her back, the muscles that have grown strong from years of this exact motion. The bucket emerges into the grey morning light, and the water inside catches what little illumination there is. It looks dark at first, but as she lifts it clear and sets it on the stone rim of the well, you can see its true nature. Clear. Remarkably, beautifully clear. This is good water, spring-fed, filtered through layers of earth and stone, cold and pure and perfect for brewing. She lifts the bucket by its handle and begins the walk back to the brewhouse. The water sloshes slightly with each step, small waves catching the light. It's heavy, this water, and the handle digs into her palm, but she's carried thousands of buckets in her life. This is just one more. Inside, the contrast is even more striking after the brief time outside. The warmth envelops her again, the humid air, the sweet smell that's growing stronger as the copper continues to heat. She carries the bucket to the waiting vessel, and now comes the moment of transfer. She lifts the bucket, tipping it carefully, and the water begins to pour. The sound is gentle, liquid meeting liquid, a splash and then a rush, and then a settling. The water falls into the copper in a clear stream, catching the firelight as it descends, and where it hits the warming metal, tiny wisps of steam begin to rise immediately. Another bucket, and another, and another. The well to the copper slowly filling, the water level rising inch by inch. Each trip is the same, but never exactly the same. The weight of the bucket, the slosh of the water, the creak of the rope, the splash at the well, the pour into the copper. Over and over, a rhythm, a meditation, a prayer of motion and purpose. The water in the copper is still relatively cool, but it's warming. The fire beneath is doing its work, transferring heat through the metal into the liquid. If you were to dip your hand in now, you'd feel it. Not hot, not yet, but warm, welcoming, alive with the energy being fed into it from below. The alewife knows exactly how much water she needs. There's no measuring cup, no marked line on the inside of the copper. But she's done this so many times that her eye is calibrated perfectly. When the water reaches a certain level, when it sits just so in the belly of the vessel, she knows it's enough. One more bucket, perhaps, to account for evaporation. And then the filling is done. She replaces the well cover, securing it against accidents, against animals, against the wind. The rope is coiled neatly. The bucket is returned to its place. And now she stands for a moment just inside the brewhouse door and watches the copper. The water is beginning to shimmer, not boiling, not even simmering, but moving slightly, responding to the uneven heating from below. Small currents form and dissolve. The surface catches the light differently now, fractured and alive rather than smooth and still. Steam is rising more steadily from the surface, thin wisps that curl upward and disappear into the shadowy ceiling. The air is growing more humid, more thick, and when you breathe it in, it feels clean and slightly warm in your lungs. This water is the foundation of everything to come. It came from deep in the earth, cold and pure, and now it's being transformed by fire, by heat, by human intention. Soon it will receive the grain. Soon it will become the medium of extraction, the solvent that draws sweetness from the malt. But for now, it's just water, simple and essential, heating slowly in a copper vessel, while the morning light grows stronger outside and the fire crackles below. The alewife reaches out and touches the side of the copper, feeling the heat in the metal, gauging the temperature with senses that go beyond simple measurement. Not yet, she decides. Soon, but not yet. And so she turns her attention to the next element, the next ingredient, the heart of the ale itself. The grain is stored in a separate room, slightly cooler, slightly drier than the main brewhouse. This is important. Grain can spoil if it's kept too damp. It can attract vermin if it's not properly protected. But here, in this space, it's safe. Sacks of barley line one wall, and the smell that comes from this room is different from the brewhouse proper. It's drier, dustier, with a sweetness that's locked inside rather than released into the air. This barley has already been through a transformation. It started as raw grain, hard kernels harvested from the field. But to make ale, barley must first become malt, and that process is its own kind of magic performed weeks or months before this brewing day. The grain was soaked in water until it began to sprout. Tiny shoots emerged from each kernel, white and delicate, as the seed prepared to become a plant. But before those shoots could grow too long, the grain was dried, spread out on warm floors or over gentle fires, halting the germination process, but preserving the changes it had created inside each kernel. Because that's what malting does. It activates enzymes inside the grain, enzymes that can convert the starch locked in the kernel into sugar. Raw barley is full of starch, but starch is a complex molecule, too large, too stubborn to dissolve easily in water. The yeast that will eventually ferment the ale into existence can't eat starch. But sugar, simple sugar, they can consume with joy. So the malt sits here in these sacks, waiting. Each kernel is a small miracle of preparation, loaded with the potential for sweetness, for nourishment, for transformation. The alewife reaches into one of the sacks and pulls out a handful, letting the kernels run through her fingers. They're dry now, but they still have a slight give when you press on them. They're not rock hard like raw grain. The sprouting and drying has left them changed, lighter in color, more fragile. When you bring them close to your nose, the smell is sweet and slightly nutty, almost like bread, but rawer, more fundamental. She lets the kernels fall back into the sack with a soft rustle, then hefts the entire sack. It's heavy, perhaps 50 pounds or more, but she's strong and the distance is short. She carries it back to the main brewhouse and sets it down near the grinding stones. The grinding is essential. Whole kernels would release their sugars only slowly, reluctantly. But cracked open, broken into smaller pieces, they'll give up their treasure much more readily when the hot water meets them. This is called making the grist, and it's hard work, physical work, but necessary work. The mill is simple. Two flat stones, one stationary and one that rotates above it. The gap between them can be adjusted, wider or narrower, depending on how fine you want the grind. For ale, you don't want flour. You want crushed kernels, broken but not pulverized, with the husks still mostly intact. The alewife begins to feed grain into the center of the upper stone. There's a wooden hopper that makes this easier, channeling the kernels toward the gap. And then she begins to turn the handle, rotating the upper stone, and the work begins. The first kernel passes between the stones and you can hear it. A crack, a crunch, a sound of structure giving way. And then another, and soon there's a steady rhythm of crunching and crackling as kernel after kernel is broken open. The handle requires strength to turn. The stones want to bind, the grain wants to resist, and she has to lean into it, using her weight, finding the rhythm that allows the work to continue without exhausting herself. Push, turn, push, turn. Her breathing deepens, her shoulders work, and slowly, steadily, the whole grain becomes grist. What emerges from the stones is beautiful in its own way. The kernels are broken, split open to reveal their pale interiors. The husks, darker and papery, are still present but torn and separated. And there's a dust, a fine powder that rises into the air with each turn of the handle, catching the light from the fire, from the small windows, creating a golden haze around the mill. The smell intensifies dramatically. Before, when the kernels were whole, the sweetness was subtle, contained. But now, with all those interiors exposed, it fills the room. It's like walking into a bakery, but rawer, earthier. Grain and sugar and potential, all mixed together in the dust that settles on every surface, that coats your throat if you breathe too deeply. The grist falls into a wading bucket below the stones. It's lighter than the whole grain, fluffier, taking up more space for the same weight. The alewife pauses occasionally to scoop the grist from the bucket into a larger tun, keeping the space below the mill clear so the grain can continue to fall freely. This grinding goes on for a long time, pound after pound of grain passing through the stones, being transformed from whole to broken, from potential to ready. The alewife's arms ache, her back aches, but the rhythm is meditative, hypnotic almost. Turn and crunch, turn and crunch. The pile of grist grows, the sack of whole grain empties. And finally it's done. The last kernels pass through the stones. The last bit of grist falls into the bucket. She stops turning and stands still for a moment, breathing heavily, letting her muscles rest. The dust hangs in the air like gold, settling slowly onto the floor, onto the tuns, onto her hair and clothing. She wipes her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of grain dust, and looks at what she's created. The grist sits in the large tun, a pile of broken grain, pale and dusty and fragrant. It doesn't look like much, perhaps. Certainly not like ale. But she knows what it is. She knows what's locked inside those cracked kernels, waiting for the hot water to release it. The copper is ready now. She can tell without even checking. The water is hot, not quite boiling but close, and steam is rising steadily from the surface. The fire beneath has been fed and is burning strong, and the grist is ground. All the elements are prepared. And now comes the moment when they meet, when water and grain begin their ancient conversation. The mash tun is ready, empty and waiting. It's one of the larger wooden tuns, positioned conveniently close to the copper. The alewife moves to it first, checking that it's clean, that there's no residue from previous batches, that the wood is properly swollen and sealed. Then she returns to the tun holding the grist. She scoops it out with a large wooden bowl, transferring it to the mash tun. Scoop after scoop, the pale, dusty grain falling with a soft sound, accumulating, creating a layer in the bottom of the tun. The dust rises with each pour, and the sweet smell intensifies further, filling the entire room, escaping out the door and into the yard beyond. When all the grist is transferred, she pauses and looks at it. Just grain, just crushed barley, sitting in the bottom of a wooden tub. Soon it will be transformed. Soon it will become something new. But for this moment, it's still itself, still recognizable as grain. She moves to the copper now, and this is where the real magic begins. She has a large wooden bucket with a long handle, designed for dipping into hot liquid without burning yourself. She plunges it into the copper, filling it with the steaming water, and lifts it out. The steam rises from it in clouds, and you can feel the heat radiating from it even at a distance. She carries this bucket to the mash tun and positions it carefully over the waiting grist. And then she begins to pour. The first stream of hot water hits the dry grain, and the effect is immediate and dramatic. Steam explodes upward in a thick white cloud, billowing and roiling, filling the space above the tun. The grain hisses and crackles as it meets the heat, and the color, oh, the color begins to change immediately. Where the water touches, the pale grain darkens slightly, turns glossy, begins to transform from dry and dusty to wet and heavy. The water itself, which entered the mash tun perfectly clear, begins to change the instant it mingles with the grist. It picks up color from the malt, from the husks, from the broken interiors of the kernels. It turns cloudy first, milky almost, and then begins to take on a golden tone, pale but definite. More water. Another bucket from the copper, carried carefully, poured deliberately over the grain. More steam, more hissing, more transformation. The level of liquid in the mash tun rises. The grain swells, absorbing water, expanding. What was dry is now wet. What was compact is now loose and soupy. The alewife continues this process, bucket after bucket, watching the mash develop, judging by eye and by experience when enough water has been added. The ratio matters. Too much water and the mash will be thin, weak, unable to extract efficiently. Too little and it will be thick, difficult to work with, and some of the grain will remain dry, its sugars locked away. But she knows. After years of doing this, she knows exactly how it should look, how it should behave. The water continues to darken as it mixes with the grain. It's no longer milky now. It's taken on a richer color, still pale but golden, like weak tea, like sunlight filtered through amber. The grain floats at first, suspended in the water, individual pieces visible. But as more water is added, as the mixture deepens, it becomes more uniform. The grist and water merge into something new, something that's neither grain nor water but a combination of both. A porridge, thick and liquid at the same time. The mash. The steam rising from the mash tun is incredible now. Thick clouds of it, warm and wet, carrying the sweet smell of grain and sugar into every corner of the brewhouse. It condenses on the ceiling beams, on the walls, on the skin of anyone nearby. Everything is damp. Everything is warm. Everything is alive with this process. The alewife sets down the bucket and looks at what she's created. The mash sits in the tun, steaming, golden, thick with grain. Bits of husk float on the surface. The liquid portion has taken on that characteristic cloudy appearance, full of tiny particles, of dissolved starches that will soon become sugars. She reaches out and touches the side of the tun, feeling the heat that's radiating from the mash itself. It's not as hot as the water was when it came from the copper, but it's warm, very warm, and that warmth is essential. The enzymes in the malt need heat to do their work, but not too much heat. Too hot and they'll be destroyed. The temperature has to be just right, in that sweet spot where the conversion can happen, where starch can become sugar. But the mash is not ready yet. The water and grain have met, yes, but they haven't fully mingled. The grist tends to clump, to form pockets of dry grain surrounded by wet. The water is absorbed unevenly. And this is where the real work begins, the work that requires strength and patience and rhythm. The alewife reaches for the mash paddle, that long wooden tool that's been waiting patiently against the wall. She lifts it, feeling its familiar weight, and positions herself at the edge of the mash tun. And then she slides the paddle down into the mash. The resistance is immediate. This is not water. This is thick, heavy, full of grain and starch and developing sugar. The paddle pushes through, but slowly with effort. She can feel every inch of its descent, the way the mash pushes back, the way it resists being disturbed. When the paddle reaches the bottom of the tun, she begins to move it. Not stirring exactly, more deliberate than that, more purposeful. She pushes the paddle forward, scraping along the bottom, lifting the grain that settled there, bringing it up into the liquid. Then she pulls back, dragging the paddle through the mash, feeling the resistance, the weight, the thickness of it all. Push, pull, push, pull. Her shoulders work, her back works, her arms work. The paddle moves through the mash, and where it passes, the grain and water mingle more thoroughly. The clumps break apart. The dry pockets are found and saturated. The heat distributes more evenly. The mash is heavy. That's the first thing you notice when you work with it. It's not like stirring soup or mixing batter. It's thick, resistant, almost alive in the way it pushes back against the paddle. Each push requires effort. Each pull requires control. And this isn't a quick task. This is work that will continue for minutes, for a quarter of an hour or more, until the mash is uniform, until every grain has been touched by the hot water, until the temperature is even throughout. The rhythm becomes everything. Push, pull, push, pull. The alewife's breathing matches the motion. In as she pulls, out as she pushes. Her body finds the most efficient way to move, using her weight rather than just her arm's strength, leaning into the work rather than fighting it. Steam continues to rise from the mash. Every time the paddle breaks the surface, a fresh wave of it escapes, carrying that sweet, intoxicating smell. The liquid portion of the mash moves when the paddle passes through it, creating currents, swirls, areas of turbulence that gradually settle as the paddle moves on. You can see the grain moving with each stroke. Bits of husk rise to the surface and then sink again. The golden liquid darkens in some areas where the grain is concentrated, lightens in others where it's thinner. The whole mash is in motion, a slow, heavy, deliberate movement orchestrated by the paddle and the hands that control it. The alewife pauses occasionally to rest, to let her arms recover, but never for long. The mash is cooling, slowly but inevitably, and the stirring needs to be thorough before the temperature drops too much. She can feel it in the paddle, the slight change in resistance as the mash cools and thickens further. Push, pull, lift and scrape the bottom. Push, pull. Move to a different spot in the tun and repeat. Work the edges, work the center. Make sure nothing is missed. Make sure every grain is part of this process. The paddle itself becomes an extension of her body. She knows exactly how it moves through the mash, how much resistance is normal, how it feels when she's hit a clump that needs extra attention. The holes in the blade allow the liquid to pass through, reducing the effort required, but they also give feedback, a particular sound and feel as the mash flows through them. Minutes pass. The work continues. Push, pull, push, pull. The rhythm never stops, never falters. This is the work. This is the craft. This is what transforms grain and water into wort, the sugary liquid that will eventually become ale. And slowly, gradually, the mash changes. It becomes more uniform. The color evens out. The consistency becomes more predictable, more homogeneous. The grain is fully saturated now, swollen with water, soft and yielding rather than crunchy and dry. The liquid has taken on a richer color, no longer pale but a definite golden tone, amber in the firelight. The alewife makes one final circuit of the tun, pushing the paddle all the way to the bottom, working the edges where grain sometimes tries to hide. And then, satisfied, she lifts the paddle out. The mash drips from it, thick and golden, falling back into the tun with soft splashing sounds. She leans the paddle against the wall, and for a moment just stands there, breathing heavily, arms aching but satisfied. The mash is ready. The stirring is done, and now comes the hardest part of all, the waiting. The heat is the key to everything that happens next. Inside the mash, invisible to the eye, enzymes are at work. These are complex proteins created during the malting process, and their job is to break down the starch molecules in the grain into simpler sugars. But they need warmth to function. They need time. They need stillness. The alewife knows this. She knows that if she simply leaves the mash tun uncovered, the heat will escape too quickly. The steam rising from the surface is beautiful, but it's also carrying away the energy that the enzymes need. So she must trap that heat, hold it in, create an environment where the conversion can happen. She moves to a stack of blankets kept specifically for this purpose. They're wool, thick and heavy, and they've absorbed the smells of countless brewing sessions. They smell of grain and sweetness, and the particular dampness that comes from being used over and over in this steamy environment. She takes the first blanket and unfolds it carefully. It's large enough to cover the entire top of the mash tun with room to spare. She drapes it over the opening, tucking it down around the edges, creating a seal that will hold the heat in. The wool is heavy and substantial, and where it touches the rim of the tun, it molds itself into place. One blanket, then another on top of it, then a third. Layer upon layer, insulation building, heat being trapped. The steam that was escaping so freely is now caught beneath the blankets. You can see them dampening already, darkening with moisture, but that's expected, that's part of the process. When the last blanket is in place, she presses down on them gently, making sure there are no gaps, no places where the heat can sneak out. The mash tun is now a warm, dark space, a nest of heat and grain and working enzymes, sealed away from the world. And now there's nothing to do but wait. The alewife pulls a stool close to the fire and sits down. The work so far has been constant, physical, demanding, but this part requires a different kind of effort, the patience to do nothing, the wisdom to let the process happen in its own time. The brewhouse is quieter now. The only sounds are the crackle of the fire, the occasional settling noise from the cooling copper, the faint drip of condensation from the ceiling beams. The steam has lessened with the mash tun covered, though the air is still humid, still warm, still carrying that sweet smell. But the smell is changing. Subtly at first, so subtly you might not notice if you haven't been here the whole time. When the grist was first ground, it smelled of grain, of dry barley, nutty and pleasant. When the hot water first hit it, that smell exploded, intensified, became almost overwhelming in its sweetness. But now, as the minutes pass, as the enzymes work their invisible magic, the character of the smell shifts. It's becoming less grainy, less like raw barley, and more like sugar itself. A cleaner sweetness, a liquid sweetness rather than a dry one. The mash is transforming, and you can smell it happening. The alewife knows how long to wait, roughly. An hour, perhaps a bit more. Long enough for the conversion to be thorough, for the starches to be broken down, for the sugars to be released into the liquid. But not so long that the mash cools too much, that the enzymes become sluggish, that the whole process stalls. She sits and watches the fire, feeding it occasionally to keep it steady. The room is warm, almost hot, and the combination of the heat and the rhythmic work and the waiting creates a kind of trance state. This is meditative work. This is patient work. This is work that's been done the same way for hundreds of years by thousands of women in countless brewhouses across the land. Time passes strangely in this space. The light from the windows shifts slightly as the sun rises higher. The shadows on the walls change their angles. But inside the covered mash tun, invisible and essential, the transformation continues. The enzymes work molecule by molecule, bond by bond, snipping the long chains of starch into shorter, simpler sugars. Maltose primarily, but others as well. Glucose, dextrins, A whole spectrum of carbohydrates that will eventually feed the yeast, that will eventually become alcohol and flavor and the substance of the ale itself. But that's still in the future. Right now, it's just sugar being created, being released, being dissolved into the liquid that surrounds each grain kernel. The wort is being born, quietly, invisibly, under the blankets, in the warmth, in the stillness. The alewife stirs herself eventually and goes to the mash tun. She lifts one corner of the top blanket, and a wave of steam escapes, billowing upward. The smell that comes with it is incredible, pure sweetness, like honey and bread and caramel all mixed together. She breathes it in deeply, and a small smile touches her lips. It's ready. She can tell. Not by any precise measurement, not by any thermometer or timer, but by experience, by instinct, by the accumulated wisdom of countless batches brewed over countless years. But she doesn't uncover it yet. There will be more work soon enough, the work of separating the liquid from the grain, of sparging and collecting and boiling. But that's the next phase. For now, for just a little longer, she lets the mash rest. She tucks the blanket back down, sealing in the heat, and returns to her stool by the fire. The waiting continues. The brewhouse is quiet and warm and full of the smell of sugar. The fire crackles. The steam condenses. And inside the covered tun, the mash rests, thick and golden and sweet, transformed from grain and water into something new, something precious, something that will soon become the ale that feeds the village, that brings people together, that marks celebrations and eases hardships. This is the work of the alewife. This is the ancient craft. This is the transformation of the earth's gifts into human sustenance, performed with skill and patience and care, in a warm room filled with steam and sweetness, while the morning sun climbs higher in the sky outside. The time has come. The alewife rises from her stool and approaches the mash tun with purpose. She lifts the blankets carefully, one at a time, folding each and setting it aside. The steam that escapes is thinner now, less dramatic than before, but still present, still carrying that transformed sweetness into the air. When the last blanket is removed, she looks down into the tun at what the waiting has created. The mash has settled somewhat. The grain has sunk, creating a thick bed at the bottom, while above it, the liquid portion has clarified slightly. It's still cloudy, still full of tiny particles, but there's a distinct separation now between solid and liquid, between what has given its gift and what has received it. The color is extraordinary. What started as pale, milky water has become something rich and deep. Amber, yes, but that word doesn't quite capture it. It's the color of late afternoon sunlight, the color of honey held up to a flame, the color of gold dissolved in water. It glows in the firelight, and when you look at it, you can almost taste the sweetness just from the appearance alone. But the sweetness is not just in the liquid. It's still locked in the grain as well, coating each kernel, filling the spaces between them. To get all of it, to extract every bit of sugar that's been created, she'll need to rinse the grain, to wash it with more hot water. But first, she needs to drain what's already there, to separate this first, richest portion from the grain that created it. At the bottom of the mash tun, near the base, there's a small wooden plug. It's been there all along, sealed tight, keeping the liquid contained. The alewife positions a large wooden bucket directly beneath this spot, making sure it's stable, that it won't tip or shift. Then she reaches for the plug. It's swollen with moisture, tight in its hole, and it takes a firm grip and a twisting pull to loosen it. She works it back and forth, feeling it start to give, and then with a final pull, it comes free. For a moment, nothing happens. Then, slowly, a trickle appears in the hole. A thin stream of liquid, dark and golden, begins to fall into the wading bucket. The sound is gentle at first, a soft pattering, liquid meeting wood, and the smell that rises from it is pure sweetness, concentrated and intense. The trickle grows into a stream. The liquid flows more freely now, gravity pulling it down and out, and the sound changes from a patter to a steady pour. The grain bed above is acting as a filter, trapping the solid particles, the bits of husk and kernel, allowing only the liquid to pass through. This is called lautering, this separation, this clarification, and it's a crucial step in the transformation from mash to wort. The alewife watches the stream carefully. At first, it comes out cloudy, full of fine particles that made it through the grain bed. But as the liquid continues to flow, as the bed settles and compacts, the stream begins to clear. It's still golden, still richly colored, but now it's translucent rather than opaque. You can see through it, watch it fall in a continuous amber thread into the bucket below. The sound is hypnotic, steady, unchanging, a constant liquid rhythm that fills the brewhouse. Drip, pour, splash, drip, pour, splash. The bucket begins to fill, the level rising slowly but steadily, and the wort. Because that's what this liquid is now called, this sweet extract from the grain catches the light as it accumulates. When you look into the bucket, the wort is beautiful, clear enough to see the bottom through it, but colored so richly that it seems to glow from within. There are tiny bubbles on the surface from the falling stream, small and delicate, catching the light like pearls. The smell rising from the bucket is intoxicating, pure liquid sugar, warm and inviting. But the bucket fills quickly, and the alewife must stay attentive. When it's nearly full, she slides it out of the way and replaces it with an empty one, never interrupting the flow. The stream continues unbroken, now falling into fresh wood, and the sound remains constant. The first bucket, full of the richest wort, is set carefully aside. This is the precious liquid, the first runnings, concentrated with sugar and flavor. She'll collect several buckets like this, each one representing the slow, patient extraction of sweetness from the grain. Time passes. The stream continues. Bucket after bucket is filled and set aside. And slowly, gradually, the level of liquid in the mash tun drops. The grain bed above becomes more visible, and the flow begins to slow. The stream becomes thinner, the sound quieter, as the liquid that was saturating the grain is drawn out. Eventually, the flow slows to a trickle again, and then to drops, and then stops entirely. The first draining is complete, but the grain is still full of sugar, still holding sweetness in the spaces between the kernels, and the alewife knows how to claim it. She has more hot water ready, heated in the copper while the mash was resting. This water is not as hot as the original mashing water, but warm, gentle, the right temperature to rinse the grain without extracting unwanted flavors. She lifts a bucket of this water and carries it to the mash tun. Then, carefully, she begins to pour it over the surface of the grain bed. The water spreads out, soaking in, and almost immediately begins to darken as it picks up the sugar that's coating every kernel. This is called sparging, this rinsing, and it will be repeated several times to extract as much sweetness as possible. The water percolates down through the grain bed, washing the sugar ahead of it, and soon the stream from the bottom of the tun begins again. It's lighter in color now, paler than the first runnings, but still golden, still sweet, still valuable. More buckets are filled, more wort is collected. The sound of trickling, of pouring continues. Another addition of hot water, another round of drainage. The wort gets progressively lighter with each sparging, the color fading from deep amber to pale gold to something almost like tea. The alewife tastes it occasionally, dipping a finger into the stream, touching it to her tongue. She's checking the sweetness, determining when to stop, when the grain has given all it has to give. Finally, after the fourth or fifth sparging, she decides it's enough. The liquid running from the tun is barely sweet now, barely colored. The grain has been exhausted. She lets this final bit drain into a bucket, but she sets it aside separately. This weak wort might be used for a small beer, a lighter drink, or it might be discarded. The good wort, the rich wort, is already collected. She replaces the plug at the bottom of the tun, sealing it once more. The spent grain will be removed later after it's cooled. It's not waste, this grain. It still has value. The animals will eat it gladly, appreciating the soft, sweet mash. But for now, it can wait. The alewife turns her attention to the buckets of wort lined up near the copper. 5, 6, 7 buckets of golden liquid, each one full of the sugar that was locked in the grain, now freed, now dissolved, now ready for the next transformation. She begins to pour the wort back into the copper. Bucket by bucket, the golden liquid is lifted and tipped, flowing in streams and splashes into the waiting vessel. The copper is already warm from the fire that's been maintained beneath it, and as the wort makes contact with the heated metal, wisps of steam begin to rise immediately. The color in the copper is magnificent. The wort pools and spreads, catching the light, glowing amber and gold. It's clearer now than it was in the mash tun, clarified by its passage through the grain bed, and you can see depth in it, transparency mixed with richness. More buckets, more pouring. The level in the copper rises steadily. This is all the work of the morning condensed into liquid form. All the grinding, all the mashing, all the stirring and sparging, all of it has led to this moment, to this vessel full of sweet wort ready for the next stage. When the last bucket has been emptied into the copper, the alewife sets it aside and turns her attention to the fire. It's been burning steadily all morning, keeping the copper warm, but now it needs to be built up, made hotter, transformed from a gentle heat into something more aggressive. She adds more wood, larger pieces, arranged to allow good airflow. The flames respond immediately, growing taller, burning brighter. The heat intensifies. You can feel it radiating from the fire, from the copper above it, filling the brewhouse with warmth that's almost oppressive. The wort in the copper is beginning to move, to respond to the increasing heat. Small bubbles form on the bottom where the metal is hottest, tiny spheres of steam that rise through the golden liquid and vanish at the surface. The wort circulates, hot liquid rising from the bottom, cooler liquid sinking from the top, creating currents and flows that make the surface shimmer and shift. The alewife watches carefully. The fire is hot now, very hot, and the wort is heating rapidly. The steam rising from the surface is increasing, getting thicker, and the sweet smell fills the entire space. It's almost overwhelming, this concentrated sweetness, this sugar-saturated air. And then it begins. At the bottom of the copper, where the heat is most intense, the first true bubbles form. Not small bubbles, but large ones, rising rapidly, breaking the surface with force. One, then another, then several at once. The boil is starting. It builds quickly once it begins. The bubbles multiply, rising from all across the bottom of the copper, streaming upward in continuous chains. The surface of the wort begins to roil and churn, broken by the constant eruption of steam bubbles. The golden liquid heaves and surges, and the steam production increases dramatically. Within moments, the wort is at a full, rolling boil. The surface is a chaos of bubbles bursting, liquid rising and falling, foam beginning to form at the edges. The sound is constant, a vigorous bubbling and hissing, the sound of liquid being violently heated, being transformed by the energy of the fire below. The steam is incredible now. It rises in thick clouds from the copper, billowing upward to the ceiling, spreading out, filling every space. The brewhouse becomes a sauna, the air so saturated with moisture that it's almost difficult to breathe. Everything is damp. The walls run with condensation. The ceiling beams drip steadily. The alewife's face is flushed and wet, her clothing clinging to her skin. But this is necessary. This boil serves multiple purposes. It sterilizes the wort, killing any wild bacteria or yeasts that might have gotten in during the mashing and lautering. It concentrates the liquid slightly, driving off some of the water, making the wort richer, stronger. It causes proteins to coagulate and settle out, clarifying the wort further. and it prepares the wort to receive the flavoring, the bittering, the preservative agents that will transform it from sweet liquid into ale. The alewife maintains the boil, watching the fire, adjusting the wood as needed to keep it vigorous, but not so violent that the wort boils over. The foam at the edges is a concern. It builds up, rising higher and higher on the sides of the copper, threatening to spill over onto the fire. She has a wooden paddle ready, and when the foam gets too high, she uses it to break the surface tension, to knock the foam back down, to prevent disaster. The boil continues. 10 minutes. 20. The brewhouse is almost unbearably hot now, and the steam is so thick you can barely see from one side of the room to the other. But the alewife is accustomed to this. This is her domain, her craft, and she works through the heat and the moisture with the ease of long practice. And now it's time. Time to add the element that will transform this sweet wort into something more complex, something bitter and aromatic, something that will balance the sugar and preserve the ale for days or even weeks. In some parts of the land, brewers use hops for this purpose. The flowers of the hop vine, dried and compressed, full of bitter resins and aromatic oils. But here, in this village, the tradition is older. Here, the alewife uses gruit, a mixture of herbs gathered from the fields and forests, dried and stored for brewing. She has a bundle of these herbs ready, wrapped in cloth. She unwraps it now, and the smell that emerges is entirely different from the sweetness that's dominated the brewhouse all morning. This is spicy, earthy, complex. There's wild rosemary in the mixture, pungent and resinous. Yarrow, bitter and medicinal. Bog myrtle, sweet and slightly intoxicating. Mugwort, aromatic and sharp. Each herb has its own character, its own contribution to make. Together, they form a blend that's been refined over generations, a recipe that's specific to this brewhouse, to this alewife, to this village. She takes a handful of the dried herbs and holds them over the boiling wort. The steam rises around her hand, warm and wet, and for a moment she pauses, appreciating the transition that's about to happen, the shift from one phase to the next. Then she opens her hand and lets the herbs fall. They hit the surface of the boiling wort and immediately are pulled under by the turbulent currents. The effect is instantaneous. The smell in the brewhouse changes, shifts, becomes something entirely new. The pure sweetness is still there, but now it's overlaid with these other scents, these earthy, spicy, floral notes that rise with the steam and fill the space. The yarrow brings a sharp bitterness, a clean edge that cuts through the sugar. The rosemary adds a piney, resinous quality, almost like the smell of a forest after rain. The bog myrtle contributes a sweetness of its own, different from the malt, more floral, more delicate. And the mugwort brings complexity, a hint of earthiness, of wildness, of the fields and forests from which it came. The alewife adds more herbs, handful after handful, until she's satisfied with the amount. The boil continues, vigorous and constant, extracting the essential oils from the herbs, the bitter compounds, the aromatic molecules. The liquid in the copper is changing again, becoming not just wort but spiced wort, bittered wort, the foundation of ale. The boil goes on for another hour, perhaps longer. The herbs circulate in the roiling liquid, breaking apart, releasing their gifts. The foam on the surface takes on a slightly greenish tinge from the herbs. The steam carries not just sweetness now, but this complex mixture of scents, filling the brewhouse and drifting out into the yard, announcing to anyone nearby that ale is being made. Eventually, the alewife decides it's enough. The fire has done its work. The boil has achieved its purposes. She begins to reduce the fuel, letting the flames die back, allowing the vigorous boiling to settle into a simmer and then into stillness. As the boil subsides, the wort begins to calm. The surface, which has been chaotic and turbulent, starts to smooth. The bubbles become less frequent, less violent. The foam begins to settle, and slowly the steam production decreases as well. The thick clouds thin out, the visibility in the brewhouse improves, and the temperature, while still hot, becomes slightly more bearable. The alewife waits until the boil has stopped completely, until the surface of the wort is still and calm, before she proceeds. The liquid in the copper is darker now than it was before the boil, concentrated slightly by the evaporation, enriched with the color and flavor of the herbs. It's a deep, rich amber, almost brown in some lights, and the smell rising from it is complex and inviting. But now comes a challenge. This wort is hot, very hot, nearly boiling, and the yeast that will eventually transform it into ale cannot survive at these temperatures. The wort must be cooled, and cooled quickly, before it can receive the yeast. But cooling a large volume of hot liquid is not a simple task. The alewife has prepared for this. She has several large, shallow pans ready, wooden frames with copper bottoms, designed specifically for cooling wort. They're positioned around the brewhouse in places where the air can circulate around them, where the cooling will be most efficient. She begins the transfer carefully. Using her long-handled bucket, she dips it into the hot wort in the copper and lifts it out. The steam rises from it in clouds, and she carries it carefully to the first cooling pan. Then she pours, and the hot wort spreads out across the shallow pan, filling it with a thin layer of golden brown liquid. The increased surface area is the key. In the copper, the wort was deep, insulated by its own mass. But here, spread thin across the pan, it can release its heat into the air much more efficiently. Already, steam is rising from the surface, carrying the heat away. More buckets, more transfers. The alewife works steadily, filling one cooling pan after another. The work is hot, exhausting. Each bucket of boiling wort radiates heat, and carrying it from the copper to the pans means walking through waves of steam, through air that's thick and humid and almost suffocating. But she persists. This is necessary work. The wort must be cooled, and there's no other way to do it. Bucket by bucket, the copper is emptied and the cooling pans are filled. The brewhouse fills with even more steam as the hot wort spreads out and begins to release its heat. When the last of the wort has been transferred, the alewife steps back and surveys her work. The cooling pans are arranged around the room, each one holding a shallow layer of hot wort. The surface of the liquid in each pan is perfectly still now, smooth as glass, and it acts like a mirror, reflecting the ceiling beams, the firelight, the shadows that play across the room. The color in the pans is beautiful. The wort has that deep amber-brown tone, rich and inviting, and where the light hits it, it seems to glow. You can see tiny particles suspended in the liquid, bits of herb, protein fragments that haven't settled out yet, all visible in the clarity of the thin layer. The smell is evolving as the wort cools. The volatile aromatic compounds from the herbs are escaping with the steam, filling the room with scent. It's less intense than during the boil, but more refined somehow, more balanced. The sweetness is there, the bitterness is there, the herbal notes are there, all in harmony. Now comes more waiting. The wort must cool to what the alewife calls blood warmth, a temperature that matches human body heat, warm to the touch but not hot. This is the temperature at which yeast thrives, at which it can be added safely without being killed by excess heat. The cooling takes time. An hour, perhaps two, depending on the temperature of the room, the circulation of the air, the depth of the wort in the pans. The alewife uses this time to clean, to tidy the brewhouse, to prepare for the next stage. She scrubs the copper with salt and vinegar, removing any residue from the boil. She cleans the buckets and the paddle. She sweeps the floor, pushing the grain dust and spilled liquid toward the door. The work is meditative, restful after the intensity of the boil, and it allows her to keep an eye on the cooling pans, to watch the steam gradually diminish. She tests the temperature occasionally, dipping a clean finger into the wort in one of the pans. At first, it's too hot to keep her finger submerged. Then it becomes merely hot, uncomfortable but bearable. Then warm. Then just right, blood warmth, the perfect temperature for what comes next. The surface of the wort in the cooling pans is remarkable as it approaches the right temperature. The steam has almost stopped rising. The liquid lies perfectly still, perfectly clear, reflecting everything above it with mirror-like precision. You can see the grain of the wooden pan edges reflected in it. The fire, burning low now, creates dancing points of light on the surface. The alewife looks at her reflection in one of the pans, her face distorted slightly by the curve of the liquid, but recognizable. This moment, this pause before the final transformation is significant. The wort is ready. The temperature is right. And now she must introduce the magic, the mystery, the element that will turn this sweet, spiced liquid into ale. She moves to a covered bucket that sits in the coolest corner of the brewhouse. This bucket has been here all along, waiting, precious beyond measure. She removes the cloth covering it, and inside is something that looks almost alive, almost supernatural. Balm, the foam from a previous fermentation, thick and creamy, yellowish white, full of yeast cells that are dormant but not dead, sleeping but ready to wake. This is the most valuable substance in the brewhouse, more precious than the copper, more important than the herbs. Without this, without the yeast it contains, there would be no ale, only sweet, spoiled liquid. The balm has a smell of its own, distinct from anything else in the brewing process. It's yeasty, obviously, but there's more to it than that. It's slightly sour, slightly fruity, complex and alive. The smell speaks of fermentation, of transformation, of life at the microscopic level doing its work. In the village, the balm is sometimes called goddess-good, goddess, good, because its action seems miraculous, divine. You add it to sweet liquid, and that liquid begins to bubble and foam, to transform itself into something intoxicating, something nourishing, something magical. How could that be anything other than a gift from God? The alewife treats the balm with reverence. She stirs it gently with a clean wooden spoon, waking it, preparing it for the work it must do. The texture is thick and creamy, and it clings to the spoon when she lifts it. She carries the bucket of balm to the first cooling pan and positions herself at the edge. The wort in the pan is perfectly still, perfectly clear, waiting. She dips the spoon into the balm and lifts out a generous portion, thick and pale, and holds it over the surface of the wort. Then she lets it fall. The balm hits the surface of the wort with a soft plop and immediately begins to spread. The creamy white against the amber brown creates a striking contrast. She adds more, spoonful after spoonful, distributing the balm across the surface of the wort. Then she takes a clean paddle and begins to stir, gently but thoroughly, mixing the balm into the wort, ensuring that the yeast cells are distributed evenly throughout the liquid. The wort becomes cloudy again as the balm is incorporated, and the color lightens slightly, taking on a hazy, golden tone. She moves to the next cooling pan and repeats the process. Add balm, stir it in, ensure even distribution. And the next pan, and the next. Each one receives its share of the precious yeast. Each one is stirred until the balm has disappeared into the wort, invisible now but present, ready to begin its work. When the last pan has received its balm, the alewife steps back. The work is done, mostly. Now the yeast must do what yeast does, what it has always done, what it will always do. It must eat the sugar in the wort. It must multiply. It must ferment. But it doesn't happen immediately. For a while, perhaps an hour, perhaps two, the wort in the cooling pans lies still and quiet. The yeast is waking, adjusting to its new environment, beginning to feed, but the signs are not yet visible. This is the quiet before the storm, the moment of anticipation. The alewife banks the fire, reducing it to coals. The brewhouse is still warm, still humid, but not as oppressively hot as it was during the boil. She lights a small lamp as the afternoon fades into evening, and its gentle glow adds to the firelight, creating a warm, amber atmosphere. And then it begins, small at first, easy to miss if you're not watching closely. But there, on the surface of the wort in one of the pans, a single bubble forms. It's tiny, barely visible, but it rises from somewhere in the liquid, swells at the surface, and then pops with the faintest sound imaginable. Then another bubble, and another. From different spots on the surface, tiny bubbles forming, rising, popping. The yeast has awakened. The fermentation has begun. The change accelerates rapidly. Within minutes, the occasional bubble becomes a steady stream. Within an hour, the entire surface of the wort in each pan is alive with bubbles. They rise from everywhere, countless tiny spheres of carbon dioxide gas produced by the yeast as it consumes the sugar and transforms it into alcohol. The sound is extraordinary. At first, it's so quiet you have to strain to hear it. A faint fizz, a delicate pop. But as the fermentation intensifies, the sound grows. It becomes a constant, gentle sizzle like fat in a pan, but softer, more delicate. Pop, fizz, a continuous rhythm that fills the brewhouse with its presence. The alewife sits on her stool and watches. This is her favorite part, the part that never fails to fill her with wonder no matter how many times she's seen it. The transformation is happening right before her eyes, invisible at the microscopic level, but manifestly visible in its effects. The surface of the wort in each pan is no longer smooth and mirror-like. It's textured, alive, constantly moving with the rise and burst of innumerable bubbles. The liquid seems to breathe, to pulse with life. And in a sense, it is alive, teeming with billions of yeast cells, each one eating, reproducing, transforming sugar into alcohol and gas. Foam begins to form at the edges of the pans. Not the harsh, aggressive foam of the boil, but something softer, creamier. It's pale, almost white, and it has a texture like whipped cream. This is the cryusen, the foam of fermentation, and it's a sign that everything is proceeding as it should. The foam builds slowly, creeping up the sides of the pans. It's thick and stable, holding its structure, and it's full of tiny bubbles that continue to form and pop within it. The texture is mesmerizing, cells of foam packed together, each one containing a pocket of carbon dioxide, each one catching the light from the lamp and the fire. As the hours pass, the cryusen grows thicker. It becomes a layer of foam covering portions of the surface, creamy and rich, and alive with constant motion. Bubbles form within the foam, rise through it, and burst at the top, creating a constant, gentle sound like whispered conversation. The smell is changing too. The sweetness is fading, becoming less dominant as the yeast consumes the sugar. In its place, new aromas are emerging. There's a fruity quality, esters produced by the yeast during fermentation. There's a bread-like smell, familiar and comforting. And underneath it all, the faint, sharp smell of alcohol beginning to form. The alewife watches the foam rise and fall with each breath. She watches individual bubbles form in the liquid, tiny and perfect, rising through the amber wort like small spheres of glass, breaking the surface and popping with that soft, constant sound. She could watch this for hours, and indeed she does. The fermentation is vigorous now, at its peak. The entire surface of each pan is a chaos of bubbles and foam. The sound has grown from a whisper to a steady, audible fizz that fills the room. It's soothing, hypnotic, this sound of transformation, of life doing its work, of sugar becoming alcohol, becoming sustenance. In the amber glow of the lamp and the dying fire, the fermenting wort looks magical. The bubbles catch the light as they rise, creating tiny points of brightness throughout the liquid. The foam reflects the glow, creating a soft, diffused luminescence. The whole scene has a quality of enchantment, of something beyond the ordinary. Time passes strangely when you're watching fermentation. Minutes seem like hours, hours seem like minutes. The constant motion, the unchanging rhythm, creates a kind of trance. The bubbles rise, the foam builds, the sound continues. Rise and pop, rise and pop. Endlessly, tirelessly, the yeast does its work. The alewife occasionally reaches out and touches the foam, feeling its texture, soft and delicate against her fingers. She smells it, bringing her hand close to her face, inhaling the yeasty, fruity aroma. She listens to it, that gentle, constant fizzing that speaks of transformation happening at a pace too slow to see but too obvious to miss. As night falls fully and the brewhouse grows darker, except for the lamp and the coals, the fermentation continues unabated. The yeast doesn't sleep, doesn't rest. It eats and reproduces and ferments, turning the wort into ale, molecule by molecule, bubble by bubble. The foam on the surface has stabilized now, thick and creamy, covering much of each pan. New bubbles continue to form beneath it, rising through the wort, passing through the foam, emerging at the top and popping. The sound is like a lullaby, gentle and rhythmic, filling the warm, dim space with its presence. The alewife knows that this vigorous fermentation will continue for a day, perhaps two, depending on the temperature, the yeast, the sugar content of the wort. Then it will gradually slow, the bubbles will become less frequent, the foam will begin to fall, and the ale will clarify as the yeast settles to the bottom of the pans. But for now, at this moment, the fermentation is alive and active and beautiful. Each bubble that rises is a small miracle. Each pop is a tiny victory. The transformation is happening, the ancient alchemy, the process that humans have relied upon for thousands of years to create one of their most essential foods. The bubbles are hypnotic in their variety. Some are tiny, barely visible, rising quickly and popping immediately. Others are larger, more substantial, rising more slowly, lingering at the surface for a moment before breaking. They form in clusters sometimes, 3 or 4 bubbles rising together in a small stream, and then they pop in rapid succession, a gentle cascade of sound. The liquid beneath the foam is in constant, subtle motion. The rising bubbles create currents, gentle circulations that move the wort around the pan. You can see it if you watch closely, the way particles suspended in the liquid drift and swirl, carried by these invisible currents. The surface, where it's visible between patches of foam, ripples and shifts, never still, always responsive to the gas rising from below. The foam itself is a landscape, a territory with its own features and characteristics. Some areas are thick and stable, built up into small peaks and ridges. Others are thinner, more fragile, constantly forming and collapsing. Bubbles emerge through it, creating temporary holes that fill in immediately as the foam flows back together. The color of the foam changes as you look at it from different angles. In direct light, it's almost white, bright and clean. At an angle, it takes on the color of the wort beneath it, becoming golden, amber, rich. The shadows within it are complex, created by the layers of bubbles, the varying thickness, the constant motion. And always, always the sound. That gentle, constant fizzing. Pop, pop, fizz, fizz. A rhythm without repetition, similar but never identical from moment to moment. It's the sound of life, of transformation, of nature doing what it has always done, what it was designed to do. The alewife occasionally stirs the fermenting wort gently, breaking up the foam, redistributing it, ensuring that the fermentation remains even throughout each pan. When she does this, the bubbles intensify briefly, disturbed by the motion, and the foam churns and reforms in new patterns. Hours pass. The night deepens. The brewhouse remains warm, lit by the lamp and the faint glow of the coals. And throughout it all, the fermentation continues, tireless, patient, transforming the sweet wort into ale. The next morning, when the first light begins to creep through the small windows, the fermentation has slowed slightly but is still active. The foam has settled somewhat, not as thick as it was at the peak, but still present, still alive with bubbles. The sound has quieted to a gentle whisper, but it's still there, still constant. The alewife has dozed in her chair through the night, waking periodically to check the fermentation, to tend the fire, to watch the bubbles rise. Now, with morning coming, she rises and stretches, working the stiffness out of her muscles. The ale is not quite ready yet. It needs another day, perhaps, for the yeast to finish its work, for the remaining sugars to be consumed, for the flavors to develop and blend. But it's close. She can smell it, the alcohol now clearly present, the sweetness much reduced, the herbal notes integrated into the whole. She stirs each pan gently, breaking up the foam, checking the clarity of the liquid beneath. It's still cloudy with suspended yeast, but clearer than it was. In another day or two, as the yeast settles, it will become even clearer, though ale is never truly transparent like water. Tomorrow or the day after, when the fermentation has finished and the ale has settled, she'll transfer it to barrels for storage and serving. But today, there's a tradition to fulfill, a signal to send to the village. She goes outside, into the fresh morning air, and cuts a small branch from a bush in the yard. It's green and fresh, still full of life, and she brings it back to the brewhouse. Then she takes it to the front of the house, to the street side, and fastens it above the door. This is the ale stake, the green bush that tells everyone who passes by that fresh ale has been brewed, that the alewife's house is open for business, that anyone who wants a drink can come and purchase it here. It's a simple signal, but an effective one, and within hours the news will have spread through the village. Before the customers arrive, though, before the work of serving begins, the alewife allows herself a moment. She ladles ale from one of the pans, the fermentation still active, still alive with bubbles, and pours it into a wooden mug. The foam rises above the rim of the mug, thick and creamy, and the ale beneath it is cloudy and golden. She carries the mug to her stool by the fire and sits down. The brewhouse is quiet now, except for the gentle fizzing of the fermentation, the crackle of the coals. She lifts the mug to her lips and takes the first sip. The ale is warm, still blood temperature, and it fills her mouth with flavor. The sweetness that remains, balanced by the bitterness of the herbs, the slight sourness from the yeast, the fruity esters, the bread-like malt flavors, the complex herbal notes from the gruit. It's rich and nourishing, almost like food, which in many ways it is. The foam leaves a line on her upper lip, and she wipes it away with the back of her hand, smiling. This is good ale. Perhaps not the finest she's ever made, but good, solid, exactly what the village needs. It will nourish them. It will warm them. It will bring them together in her brewhouse, in conversation and community. She takes another sip, savoring it, and looks around the brewhouse. The copper, clean and ready for the next batch. The cooling pans, full of fermenting ale. The tools, the tons, the paddle, all the equipment of her craft. This is her life, this work, this ancient process of transformation. Outside, through the open door, she can see the ale stake moving slightly in the morning breeze, green and visible, announcing to the world that the ale is ready. Soon people will come. Soon the mugs will be filled and emptied and filled again. Soon the brewhouse will be full of voices and laughter and the warmth of community. But for now, for this moment, it's just her and the ale and the gentle sound of fermentation, the quiet work of yeast transforming sugar into sustenance, the ancient magic that has fed humanity since the very beginning. And as the yeast continues its quiet work in the dark, the brewhouse remains warm and sweet. The drink is made, the village is fed, and you are safe. Sleep well.